Welcome. My name is Piper Chapman, and I am the Assistant Director at Harvard Alumni Travels. Thank you for joining us today for our Travel Talks webinar, Exploring South Asia's Traditions of Cosmopolitanism, presented by Professor Ali Ahsani. Before I turn things over to our distinguished speaker, I'd like to review the format for today's Zoom webinar. For the duration of the lecture, your video and microphone will be turned off so we can direct our attention to our speaker. At the bottom of your screen, you will see several buttons to interact with. Please insert your questions in the Q&A box. You will also see a chat box, which is intended for comments, sharing information, and to engage with fellow alumni. To chat the entire audience, please select all panelists and attendees when submitting your comment. For those of you who would like to hide this chat feature, you may do so by moving the chat feed to the side of your screen. Closed captioning is available, and you will find it by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Should you have any technical issues, please message our support team by selecting HAA support in the chat. Alternatively, this lecture is live streamed to YouTube, so if you wish to join us there, please find the YouTube link in the chat. Please note today's 1-hour webinar will be recorded and shared with you. Finally, we appreciate your patience should we experience technological glitches or delays due to the nature of our virtual environment. There will be a few videos shown throughout the presentation. Please be aware that you can adjust your sound preferences on your personal devices accordingly. In the spirit of travel, I'd like to kick things off by encouraging all of you to share your location in the chat box so we can see where everyone's tuning in from. Let's take a look. Great, thank you. Keep them coming. It looks like we have over 100 people with us today. I am so thrilled to pass this over to Professor Ahsani, but first, a brief word about our alumni speaker. Ali Ahsani is the Murray A. Albertson Professor of Middle Eastern Studies and Professor of Indo-Muslim and Islamic Religion and Cultures. He has taught at Harvard since 1983. Offering instruction in a variety of South Asian and African languages and literatures, as well as courses on various aspects of the Islamic tradition. Ali is a beloved member of Harvard University and our alumni travel program. In 2020, he was awarded the Harvard Foundation Faculty of the Year Award for his tireless efforts for making Harvard a more inclusive place. Ali, I am delighted to have you with us today, and I would love to pass the mic over to you. The virtual stage is yours.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, Piper. And I'm going to share my screen with you. All right. So welcome everyone to this webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to celebrate and also to bring attention to South Asia's rich traditions of cosmopolitanism. And by cosmopolitanism, I mean, sharing values with people who are very different from yourself. So in that sense, I'm talking about a cosmopolitan ethic. As well as inclusion, traditions of inclusion rather than exclusion, looking at specifically the cultures and the literary and performative arts as they are expressed with Sufi mystical shrines that are scattered all over South Asia. Now, these traditions are very important, especially in light of the dehumanizing discourses in contemporary South Asia, where people become targets of violence on account of their caste, their religion, their class, their ethnicity, and even gender. And these traditions that I'm going to be talking about offer us a compelling alternative model for engaging with and understanding human diversity, one that is endured over a longer period of time than these contemporary discourses of exclusion that we see today. So many of you are aware that, I'm just going to put my PowerPoint on. Yeah, many of you are aware that the history of South Asia, the political history of South Asia, has embedded ideas of nationalism within the context of religion. And some of this embedding took place during British colonial rule and has endured even after the post-colonial phase. And these nationalism generally, of all forms, including religiously formulated ones, are premised on the notion of the other. And in South Asia, the other has come to be represented in terms of religious communities being imagined as nations. And hence the emergence of the two-nation theory, which has ended up in, what we call the partition, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but ended up in the partition and the creation of India and Pakistan. And initially, both India and Pakistan at the time of partition, even though Pakistan was created as a Muslim homeland for Muslims who feared persecution because they were a minority in India, but as a Muslim homeland, became eventually over time an Islamic state in the sense that it came to be seen as a place where Islam is interpreted as a political ideology. And India, which began also as a secular state where people were allowed to had, the freedom to practice their faith, and all citizens were equal in the eyes of the state. In recent years, India has become increasingly a Hindu state. That is, it has become where Hinduism is used as a political ideology, a principle that's called Hindutva. And it has been extremely detrimental to the to minority populations in India, particularly Muslims who have been targeted as the other, as part of this construction of this very dangerous form of religious nationalism. But it's also had other implications for Indian society, like they're controlled over freedom of speech, people who dare to speak out are persecuted, and so on and so forth. So interestingly, both nations started out as secular nations, but they've ended up pretty much in the same spot. Both have become states where, because religion is so entwined with politics, that many people feel disenfranchised under these, in both countries. Now, I want to provide an alternative way in which South Asia has dealt with this issue of religious difference. And for this, we're going to visit Ajmer. This happened to be a place where I took a group of alumni several years ago. And in Ajmer is the Dargah, or the tomb shrine of Muinuddin Chishti, a Sufi master who settled here and then was buried here in 1236. He came here from what is now Afghanistan. Some people have been coming to this shrine in their millions over the centuries, ever since he's been buried here. And for some Muslims in this region, they've considered a pilgrimage to the shrine, or some people say 7 pilgrimages to the shrine is equivalent to going to Mecca. And the list of dignitaries here of all faiths who have visited here to pay their respect is very, very impressive. And even in the current period, you find a lot of Indian politicians visiting, but we've had instances of when the president of Pakistan visits, he always comes to this place. When the prime ministers of Bangladesh come, they always come and visit this place. So it's become this hub. While it's a sacred space, it's also become a hub where politicians come and pay homage. They not like to be seen in this particular place. So, and a little bit about the person who's buried here. Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti was born in, as I said, in this place, Chist in Afghanistan. And according to tradition, he came to India as a result of a command that he received in a dream from the Prophet Muhammad, and he eventually settled here in Ajmer. And here he reached out to peoples of all faiths, especially the poor and the needy. He is famed for his declaration that the highest form of devotion that one can have is to redress the misery of those in distress, and to fulfill the needs of the helpless, and to feed the hungry. Hence, he's locally called Khwaja Garib Nawaz, which means the patron of the poor. And not surprisingly, today, feeding and looking after the poor, the sick, regardless of one's faith, is one of the central missions of this shrine, which is guided by the principle that one can only love God by loving humanity and all of God's creation. One of the most famous personalities, historic personalities, to reach out really for assistance at the shrine. So a lot of people come to the shrine with supplications, with prayers, with wishes that they hope to be fulfilled. And through the intercession of the saint, women come here who are seeking, a child, or people come here to be cured of sicknesses, all kinds of people come here to pray to pass exams. Politicians have come here to pray that they win the elections, and so on and so forth. So not surprisingly, historically, we have one of these great emperors of India, the Mughal Emperor Akbar, who made 14 pilgrimages on foot to this particular shrine because he so believed in its power. And it is related that he sought the blessings of a descendant of Muinuddin Chishti, so that his wife could have a son. And this descendant of Muinuddin Chishti predicted the birth of this son. And in fact, after the birth of the son, the emperor made another pilgrimage, and he gave a huge donation to the shrine, including a giant cooking pot, which is used till today to feed the poor and the needy. So this is a place where I brought our Harvard alumni group, because I felt that this is such an important place. Millions and millions of people come here every year. And this is Syed Salman Chishti, who is one of the caretakers of the shrine, and with whom over the years I've become good friends. So when I told him I was bringing a group of Harvard alumni to the shrine, he said, "Oh yeah, I'll be happy to welcome you to the shrine." And so here he is. And this is a picture of the group right here. It's a small group. You can see here Syed Salman Chishti. I don't know whether you can see my pointer. Here I am. And here's Triadi right here. I don't know whether she's watching. She's with the director of Harvard Alumni Travel, so she was with us. But these are some of the travelers who are here. So what Syed Salman Chishti did was he, of course, told us a little bit about who Muinuddin Chishti was. He showed us around the complex. And then it was time to go into the tomb itself, where Muinuddin Chishti is buried. And so you had to line up. It's a beautiful building. You line up like this and you go in. It's very, very crowded. And because we were with this guide, they'd made special arrangements for us to get in there. And when you get in there, you get into a room that's packed with people. Of course, you don't see the people here, but there are rose petals all over the place. And then there's somebody going around sprinkling rose water on people, and the people are offering prayers and so on. So Syed Salman Chishti had told the group that sometimes people offer a cloth covering to put on the tomb. And so we had this cloth covering. And he asked us to, each of us, to hold this huge sheet of embroidered material. And we were each holding up one end of this material. It was very heavy. And while we were holding it above our heads, he was reciting prayers. And in the midst of these prayers, he was next to me and he whispered in my ears, Professor, see, some of them are weeping. And actually, when I looked, many people's eyes were moist. Some people had tears coming down their eyes. Very interesting, moving experience for people, very mysterious. And then we left the sheet over the tomb, and then everybody walked out. And people were just a little bit dazzled by this event, what just happened. And it was only the next day that one of the travelers asked me, if this is about Islam and religion, and it's so powerful, how come I've never heard about this place? And of course, this, raises this issue of what catches attention in the news media. Violence and terrorism and all these kinds of things in the name of religion are always in the news. But a place like this, where millions of people from all faiths go and pay homage and seek blessing, doesn't make the news. So it's not that well known in the West, except among some people. But in India, it's a very famous pilgrimage site. So what I'd like to do now is I want to show you a little clip from a video taken at this place. And let me share my screen.
Centuries before, with travelers, scholars, and the Sufi saints. One of the earliest and greatest Sufi saints was Khwaja Muhyiddin Chishti, and it was at his shrine here.
We'll just try to start this again. I think it's not. I'm sorry, it seems to have frozen on me. So I'm going to stop the share. And I will try it again. So pardon me for a minute while I try to get back and restart it. Yeah, sorry.
Did you want to try it one more time, Ali, or does it not seem to be working?
I'll try it one more time.
Okay, yeah, give it one more try. Any luck? You can try sharing.
We tried it before, and
I know it just worked for us.
And
maybe we can try it at the end.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what was in this video. It showing people from going into the shrine, there, the place where you had the rose petals and so on, and it's showing people playing this qawwali music. It's a particular type of gospel singing that's going on outside the shrine. And then we have, in addition, there are these people of all faiths are there. And then they interview these women, asking them what's their faith, and they say they're Hindu, and the commentator asked them, well, why have you come here? And they say, well, we've come here, you know, we've cleansed ourselves, we've bathed ourselves, and we've come here to be blessed. And, you know, and the interviewer tells them that, well, you know, if you are, if, you know, why do you believe in this place? She said, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, one of the women, I mean, these are ordinary village women who are there, you know, tells the interviewer that, you know, I believe God is everywhere. Human beings have just separated God into different traditions, and I can just as well come here and be blessed. What she uses the Hindi word darshan. I can come here and be blessed as any place else, because God is everywhere. And so that was the clip that I wanted to show you. But if I'm able to, towards the end, we'll see if we can get back to it. But let me now go back to my PowerPoint, which is now, where did that PowerPoint go? All right, so the point I was trying to make by showing you this video was to show you this. Here's what is shrine, and it's an inclusive space. And people of all faiths come here, regardless of your religious identity. They know there's a Muslim saint who's buried here. They know this has an Islamic background, but it doesn't faze them in the slightest, because they feel something here. They feel blessed. People have had their wishes fulfilled here. There are homeless people who come here. Some families leave, you know, relatives who have, you know, who are suffering from mental disease. They leave them here to be cured. There's a hospital here. So all kinds of people come here and they see meaning in this place. So this idea that this is an inclusive space, and it's almost as if that, you know, inside, once you enter this space, it doesn't matter what your religion is, whether you're Hindu or you're Muslim or Christian or Jewish, whatever you are, you're welcome as you are. And that's what I mean about this as an inclusive space. But the moment you step out of this space, you sort of get back into your normal identity, or quote unquote normal identity as Hindu or Muslim, because the space outside the shrine is not so inclusive. And one of the things that you see in the shrine, and that's it's too bad we didn't watch the video, is that there are all these performances taking place of a certain type of music. It's called qawwali. And this is a tradition that has developed around shrines in South Asia, where you have these singers, and you can see some of these singers here, who are reciting devotional poetry in many different languages. It could be in Arabic, Persian, Hindi, Urdu, and so on. And you can see the audiences are gathered in large numbers, and they're listening to this qawwali, this particular type. It's very rhythmical. There's a very strong beat to it. And usually the recitation starts with a slow beat, and then it goes faster and faster. And the idea is that the musicians are trying to the music to communicate with the hearts of the listeners. So they say that the drum beat that they're playing should resonate with the heartbeat of the listeners. And the idea is to get them into a state where they're actually, the music helps them transcend, you know, their physical environment. So here again, you have this idea of not only transcending your identity, but transcending, you know, yourself as a human and connecting to another realm. And what I call this type of music, because the lyrics have, of course, an ethical and intellectual and spiritual message, which I'll talk about, but I call it theopoetics. It's theology and poetics and aesthetics all fused together because it's something that people experience. And some of the kinds of themes that you, and the characteristics of this, you're creating a community of different individuals through oral performance. And this poetic knowledge that is being conveyed is in the quest for the divine, the contemplative, the transcendent. And some of the major themes in this are of love, humanism, freedom, oneness. And as part of this reigning motif of love, love is seen as this cosmic principle, and love-centered knowledge is seen as challenges to orthodoxy, people who use religious labels, and poetic knowledge, it serves as a site of contestation and subversion. So very often they'll critique in this poetry religious authorities, like it could be a Hindu priest or a Muslim mullah, religious scholar, saying, you don't know really what religion is about. You think religion is about controlling people and laws and regulations, and you instill fear, but religion is about love and liberation, and it's open to everybody. So these are some of the themes in there. And the person who is said to have invented this genre and that popularizes is actually Amir Khusro, who's buried in a Sufi shrine in Delhi near Nizamuddin Aulia. And Amir Khusro was very interesting because in the 13th and 14th century, because he came from a father who was of Turkish origin and a mother who was Indian. And he was a brilliant historian, but also a brilliant poet. So he ended up, through his poetry, creating this bilingual poetry where one line would be Persian, he spoke Persian, and the other line would be Hindi, and create entire poems like this. He experimented with musical genres and melodies. It's said that he invented the sitar. He took a Middle Eastern form of an instrument and then created the sitar, so it became an Indian form, and so on. So somebody who came from a cosmopolitan background embodied it in his lineage, and then actually played around with these different cultures and created a genre of the Qawwali, which itself, tries to reach out beyond boundaries. Now, what you see here is in the political realm, the realm of nationalism, you see religion as an ideology of difference and identity marking, and of course of inclusion, exclusion, and so on. But what you see in the Sufi Dargah, that religion is faith, religion is experience, where people are not concerned about their socio-political identity, is a totally different thing. And it can actually be unifying. Now, the power of this poetry is such that it's not just confined to the Sufi shrines. It spreads, it's widespread in the culture. And I want to give you an example from the time of the partition. And those of you who know the history, during the partition, there were this horrendous migration of, Muslims from India, Muslims who were afraid they would be persecuted in India, moving to Pakistan, which was either West Pakistan or East Pakistan. And then similarly, you had Hindus and Sikhs who were in West Pakistan moving into India. And this was millions, and very tragic, but this was perhaps one of the greatest sort of migrations of refugees in the last 2 centuries. And it was not an easy moment in South Asian history. Lots of people suffered, and there was a lot of violence involved with this. And in some of these most sort of bloody acts of violence that would take place is that the trains that would be going back and forth from India and Pakistan carrying these refugees, people you would have trains arriving in Pakistan in which all the Muslims had been slaughtered by mobs in India. And similarly, trains in Pakistan with Hindus and Sikhs would cross over the border into India. Again, Hindus and Sikhs would be slaughtered. So a very, very tragic, horrific event. Many families were separated. But I want to narrate to you an interesting incident that happened during one of these times at a place called Arifwala, which is, I don't know whether you can see my pointer here. It's right near across the border of India and Pakistan, very close. There were people standing in a railway station, and just, they had just an hour or so, there'd been a train filled with massacred, killed Muslims, coming to the station. And, the people here were just, there was a mob, absolutely furious at what had happened. And there was a mob, a mullah, a religious leader inciting the mob, that we should take revenge. And then they heard rumors that there was a train full of Hindus and Sikhs that was coming through. And so they were all ready to attack this train. And when the train came, it was interesting. There was a Sikh who was hanging out from one of those windows. And apparently it said that he was drunk or he was on opium or something, but he was singing out aloud verses from a very famous Varish Shah, who's a very famous Sufi poet who wrote in the Punjabi language. And some of these verses were from an epic, a very famous Punjabi epic, which has been made into a movie. This is this movie Heer Ranjha, and it's a love story between Heer and her beloved Ranjha. But in any case, he was reciting these verses from this epic. And in one of the verses he recited was in this epic, because, Ranjha had fled from his home to be close to Heer, and he had sought asylum from a Muslim mullah, and this mullah refused to give him asylum. In any case, so the poem is very critical of this mullah, this religious scholar, who refused to show sympathy. And he was reciting this aloud, and all of a sudden, the mob just stopped on hearing these verses of Varisha. The reason is that everyone, whether they were Hindu or Sikh or Muslim, they were all Punjabi. They all spoke the same language, and they all knew the story, and they all knew these verses, and they all knew the tragedy behind the story of Heer Ranjha. And a Sikh singing this poetry out from this train actually stopped the mob. And miraculously, this train left the station and nobody was hurt. The interesting thing was that poetry had people realize that these people are not Hindu and Sikhs. They're Punjabis. We may have separate religions, but we have the same ethnicity. We share the same literature. We have the same literary heroes, and so on. And all of a sudden, that made this crowd appear human. And, everyone recognized the humanity of others. And that they moved away from this single-dimensional categorization of human beings, what Amartya Sen calls, that when you see a human being just to a single dimension of their identity, you in fact dehumanize them. And it combines this haziness of vision with increased scope for exploitation of that haze by champions of violence. And exactly what happened here was that single-dimensional categorization was broken, and it saved an entire train. But think about it, that these traditions of poetry were so powerful in the conscience of the people. Now, these traditions of this poetry are manifested in many, many different ways in contemporary South Asian societies. And I wanted to just bring you one example. A very famous poet, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who writes in Urdu. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature. won the Lenin Peace Prize, a very influential figure in Pakistan, and he posthumously was honored by the Pakistan government and given the nation's highest award. However, I'm glad that posthumously he was recognized by the Pakistan government, but he was a critique of the kind of feudal society that existed in Pakistan. He spent many years in prison. He was imprisoned by the Pakistani government. He spent time in exile in Russia, in Beirut, and so on. And in the late 1970s, when Pakistan was under this military dictator, Zia-ul-Haq, who was trying to make Pakistan an Islamic state. And as a result, there was sectarian warfare and all this, because when you try to impose one form of religion, you privilege it over other forms. It's just disaster for human rights, for freedom of religion, and so on. And in this case, it also affected rights of women. So it was just, everything was in chaos. And Faiz Ahmad Faiz was imprisoned because he spoke out against this. And while he was in prison, he wrote a poem, it has this title, Hum Dekhenge, we will see, we will witness. And this poem, which you will listen to shortly, is replete with references to the call from the Quran for accountability, for reckoning, for social justice. And in this poem, he also refers to a Sufi, a very famous Sufi mystic, Al-Hallaj, was executed in 922 AD. And for standing up to the religious and political establishment of his time. One scholar has called him a socialist before his time, but he's connected with this phrase, Ana al-Haq, I am the truth. The word haq can also mean God, but I'm the truth. In any case, what Faiz does with this poem, that he turns Zia's religious symbolism on its head, and uses this Islamic iconography of social justice and equity to attack an Islamist military dictator. Of course, the poem was banned, along with his other poetry. But a woman, Iqbal Banu, was a very famous singer, who decided that she had had enough of this tyranny. She decided to pick this poem, Hum Dekhenge, and she recited it wearing a sari. And wearing a sari was important because Zia had decided that sari was a Hindu garment, which is a little bit crazy because women all over the subcontinent wear the sari, but he declared it Hindu. So she wore a sari and she recited this at a poetic assembly. And this became the song for protest against Zia's government. In recent times, this same song has become the anthem of protest all over India, of people singing this song against the regime of Modi. So it's very interesting how something that was written in one context has now moved into another context. And I'm just going to play you this video. Somebody's made a video out of this song, but it's talking about oppression and injustice, and it's talking about that ultimately all tyrants will have to come to a reckoning before God, and justice will prevail and people will prevail. And this video, I'm sort of showing it today because in many ways, it resonates with some of our protest movements, like the Black Lives protest movement that we've had here, and also in memory of George Floyd, because you can see what this looks like in South Asia, where poetry becomes a way of standing up against tyranny.
हम देखेंगे, लाज़िम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे वो दिन के जिसका वादा है, जो लौहे अज़ल में लिखा है, हम देखेंगे जब धड़ धड़ धड़केगी और अहले हकम के सरों पर जब बिजली कड़ कड़ कड़केगी हम देखेंगे जब से खुदा के काबे से सब बुत उठवाए जाएंगे हम अहले सफा मरदूदे हरम मसनद पर बिठाए जाएंगे सब ताज उछाले जाएंगे सब ताज उछाले जाएंगे सब तख्त गिराए जाएंगे हम देखेंगे वो दिन के जिसका वादा है जो लोहे अज़ल में लिखा है हम देखेंगे बस ना खुदा का गूंजेगा जो गायब भी है हाजिर भी जो मंजर भी है नाजिर भी उठेगा अनल हक का नारा जो मैं भी हूँ और तुम भी हो और राज करेगी खल्के खुदा और राज करेगी खल्के खुदा जो मैं भी हूँ और तुम भी हो हम देखेंगे लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे हम देखेंगे हम देखेंगे
All right. So, this is a very interesting video because it's, of course, it connects the story of oppression in the subcontinent by local, governments and so on of the people. And then it connects it to other incidents of oppression and injustice throughout history, past and present. But some of the verses that are in this poem that Faiz Ahmad Faiz uses are in fact direct references to verses from the Quran, but you wouldn't realize it. Like the despots that will be blown away like the clouds, like fluff in the sky. That's actually a direct quote from the Quran. And this phrase that I am God or I am the truth, it's actually a claim that in every human being, in every creature, there's the spark of the divine. And what connects us all is this divine spark, the spark that makes us human. And so each of us has this part of divinity in there. And that's why there is the recognition that we have something that we share. It's not religion as a social political identity, but there's a sacredness there's a sacred link that we share. And it ends with, of course, showing these places of worship. In India, it could be a Hindu temple or a Sikh Gurudwara or a mosque or a church, and saying at the core of these traditions, when they're not being used in, instrumentalized politically, there is a sacred truth, and we should pay attention to that sacred truth. And it ends with actually a quote from the Upanishads, one of the Hindu scriptures, which basically says that all humanity is one family. And it also reminds me of another quote from the Upanishad, Tattvam Asi, that you are the other, and the other is you. There is no separation. So I'm going to stop here, but the point here was to try to show you that in South Asia, you have these discourses of cosmopolitanism, of inclusion, of embracing the other, which is taking place very often at the level of ordinary people, whereas you find amongst the elites and the upper classes and middle classes, and upper middle classes, there's a sense of privilege, and unfortunately, in the name of religion and so on, a lot of oppression is taking place. So I'm going to stop here and we can open up for some questions.
Thank you so much, Ali. And I just want to reiterate one comment that I'm seeing throughout the chat, and that was just an incredibly powerful video. So thank you for sharing that with us. Yes, I would like to transition to the Q&A portion of the program. So please feel free to send your questions to the Q&A box and we'll get through as many as possible. I would like to start with this question, Ali. How can we apply lessons of South Asia to increase tolerance in the West, where we don't have the same traditions of mysticism?
Yeah, well, I think we don't have these traditions of mysticism, but if you think about certain sort of ideals that we have, so for example, we have this ideal in the United States, a pluribus unum, that in our diversity we are united, and that diversity does not mean giving up difference, but despite our differences, we have some common ideals, some common values, which we share as a nation. At least that's in theory. And that's an ideal that is very similar in terms of the cosmopolitan ideal that you're finding, in the Sufi shrine, the idea that we all have a common humanity and we have to recognize each person's right to be different, but embrace their right to be different and not try to exclude people because they're different. So we have the same ethos, I would say. We may not term it mysticism, but I think the ethos is very much there. And I think just as in South Asia, we have the ideals, and I'm talking again in the context of the United States, we have these ideals, but we know that we are very far from fulfilling those ideals. The realities are very different. Not everybody's following those ideals all the time. And so, but in order to get a just society, an equitable society, we always have to keep on reminding us what the ideals are, that we have these common ideals. The problem, of course, is when not everybody strives to the same ideals. So, yeah.
Thank you. Our next question, is Sufism an organized religion? And then I do have a follow-up after that, but I'll let you start with there.
Yeah, so I would not say Sufism, the term Sufism is a Western term. As you can see from the ism that's attached to it, it's an English term that has been, it's a concoction coming from Western scholars who studied the tradition, imagined it as a separate kind of an ideology. But rather than thinking about it as an ideology, it is then, I would say it's a disposition, a way of looking at the world, which is characterized by realizing that beyond the physical world, the material world, there is a spiritual world, there's the world of the soul. And through that spiritual world, there's this abyss that separates all of God's creation from sacred. But if you acknowledge that there is in fact this sacred, the world of the sacred, the world that's beyond the physical experience, the physical world, and you're trying to attain that, then you're Sufi in your orientation. There are some people who say there's no such thing. It's the material world, and that's about it. But this idea that you could experience the transcendent experience, that I would call is Sufi. So it's more an orientation. So, some people say, well, can you be Christian and Sufi, or can you be Hindu and Sufi? Obviously, you can, because it's not a label of a religious particular ideology. People do try to confine it within a label, but I think it defies labeling.
Thank you. To the next question that just came in, how are the Muslims and people following other religions in India dealing with the fact that the Prime Minister of India is trying to make India a Hindu nation?
Well, this phenomena of trying to make India a Hindu nation, it's not just a recent thing. It's been going on. It started before the partition. These movements that were trying to declare that India should be a Hindu nation, in which Jawaharlal Nehru, one of the first prime ministers, and the Congress party and so on, had resisted for a very long time that this is not what India was created for. So it's an issue that not only Muslims and people of other faiths, there are many Indians who feel that the secular ideals of India have been have been sacrificed to the goals of a political party, a right-wing political party that wants to instrumentalize religion as a political tool of legitimation, but also oppression by otherizing people. So there have been resistance movements, and but some of the, and this, I can go on and on talking about the violation of human rights, civil rights. There have been pogroms, people being killed just because they were Muslim. There's a kind of discrimination that takes place in several parts of Indian society now, where Muslims are not given, if you want to rent an apartment in a particular building, if you're Muslim, you won't get it. It's a kind of apartheid atmosphere that's developed in India as a result of this. And it's troubling to many Indians, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure. Our next question here. In your research, do the lives and teachings of the Sufi saints of South Asia resonate in the rest of the Islamic world? Are these saints well known outside of South Asia?
Well, in one sense, they are, in the sense that, the largest concentration of Muslims in the world live in South Asia. So there are more Muslims who live in South Asia than in any other part of the world. So I would say close to 60%, 60 to 65% of the world's Muslims live in South Asia. And because these Muslims, through the diaspora, have settled in different parts of the world, in Canada, in America, and so on, and some of them are connected with these shrines. They know all about this, and so there are people regularly going to visit these shrines, even though they're living abroad or sending remittances. But there have been these Sufi traditions have been in dialogue with also the Persian tradition. So, for example, a figure like Rumi, who is renowned as one of, a world renowned mystic from the Persian tradition, whose works have been translated into English. Rumi, it says, greatly influenced some of the poets and the writings of Muslims in South Asia. So, for a long time, we are looking at South Asia as having these current boundaries. But if you went back, say, 100 years or 150 years, these political boundaries weren't there. And people from Central Asia and Iran and even what is now Turkey, but the Ottoman lands would go back and forth. There were no boundaries that kept people apart. Now you need a passport. So ideas from one part of the world moved to another part of the world and were actually participating at least at the levels of the elites. It's quite a cosmopolitan world, much more so than they're doing now. So I would say that because of this, some of the teachings of some of these Sufis are well known in other parts of the world, just as teachings of some of these Persian poets or Arab poets writing in the same mystical traditions, their teachings are known in South Asia as well.
Thank you. Is Sufism more related to either the Sunni or to the Shia approach?
So actually it's both. You can be, so Sunni and Shia is more like, I would say, a legalistic definition in terms of where you believe authority lies.
Okay.
And interpret things. But you can be Sufi and Sunni you can be Sunni and Sufi in your orientation. You can be Shia and Sufi in orientation. But you can also be Sunni and non-Sufi. Some people will be anti-Sufi. There is an anti-Sufi movement too, among some Muslims who don't think this is part of Islam whatsoever. So you have Sunnis who are anti-Sufi and there are Shia who are anti-Sufi. So it transcends that. So it's, as I said, it's more of a disposition than anything else.
Thank you. And just switching gears a bit here, one of our viewers has actually asked about your background. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And is there any significance you can share with the group?
Well, I myself, actually come from an African background in the sense that I was born and raised in Kenya. Though of South Asian ancestry, my mother's side of the family originated and moved to India long before the partition, as did my father's family. So, but moved. So my mother's side has been there almost 200 years in Africa. And so I grew up in Africa, had never visited South Asia. And then I came to Harvard for my education, and I decided to study religion, and I was very interested in Islam. And I studied some of these traditions under a very famous professor at Harvard, and Mary Schimmel was the world's greatest expert on Sufism during her lifetime. And she knew Arabic and Persian and Urdu and Sindhi. So she really encouraged me to go into studying these traditions. And so I came to Harvard and basically never left. I'm still here on the faculty and teaching away and trying to expose people to different ways of thinking about the world.
Thank you. And actually, I should have clarified, although that was wonderful, and I'm sure our viewers are very much appreciate hearing about your personal background. I actually was referring to your virtual background on your computer, because that is
the virtual background.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We would love to hear about that too.
Yeah. So this is actually just a picture of Alhambra in Spain.
Okay.
It's part of the Muslim heritage in Spain. So it's the Alhambra Palace, and it's in one of the gardens. And I'd like to say that's where I am right now, but not Massachusetts.
Of course.
But I wish I was there.
Yes, very nice to see that. Well, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions coming in. I will give it one more minute or so. But do you have any final closing words for us, Ali? This was so enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, we live in a world everywhere. We are seeing this polarization and fragmentation of human society for a variety of reasons. And human beings are constantly being labeled and categorized. And it's just sort of the ethos of the time. You're always talking about label, but those labelings can actually be quite dangerous because they also tend to dehumanize people. And I think you should remember that each human being may have a visible identity. It could be race or ethnicity or gender and so on. But each human being also has many different identities which are hidden. And we have to acknowledge that a person may have some hidden identities that they share with you that you're aware of. And you're judging them by what you see as an external identity that's more visible. And you think, oh, this person is different. But actually, if you got to know them and engage with them holistically, you'd realize you'd have a very different image of that individual. So I think it's very important today that we engage with human diversity in all its complexities, not go beyond the label. And just remember that everyone you meet has a story which humanizes them. So learn from their stories and share your story.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ali. And on behalf of the Harvard travel team, I want to thank you so much for your time today. As soon as this webinar closes, a brief survey will appear. We'd be grateful if you would take the time to complete this survey so we can continue to better serve you. As a reminder, the recording of this lecture will be shared with you. Finally, we hope you'll join us for our next webinar, The Rise of China in the World of Universities, featuring Professor William Kirby, on Wednesday, May 12th at 3 p.m. Thank you so much and stay well.